We talked a lot about tariffs in general, the history of tariffs, how they work, where the money's going, how we're getting the money, how they're changing on a daily basis. But I guess circle back going to where we really started with this conversation, the idea of having this is how this is going to affect the electrical industry with a lot of the products being produced overseas, from my experience, and I might be wrong, but China and Mexico as well. And for these tariffs taking effect in today or next week or whenever they may be, what's really the impact with these manufacturers and how is it going to impact their business or the way they're interacting with their distributors or wholesalers? I've heard different things come out where some manufacturers have brought in 3 years of supplies and they have them in warehouses now so that they're not having to worry about the tariffs for a while, so that they can continue keeping their prices the way they are until they sort of even out when this current administration's time is coming to a close and they can sort of hedge their bets, I guess. I've heard of others that are building up supplies for 6 months, some for a year, so that they're not seeing massive price increases, and others that are just, they don't know what the hell's happening. So I could be frank, there's a lot going on. Let's be honest. You can't blame them at all. But, so how is this really affecting this? Because we've seen changes with COVID that happened, the effects of the supply chain when COVID happened and things got shut down, and we saw prices skyrocketing and copper prices jumping every hour. I mean, I played golf with this random guy that happened to be a purchasing agent at a distributor place, and he's like, my quotes are good for like 48 hours on copper right now. And I'm like, what? Like, it seemed like craziness. So how's tariffs going to excuse me, not infect, but affect the manufacturing portion of this industry, and sort of what's the trickle down going to be when they do take effect?
Yeah, so that was the $30 trillion question, right?
Yeah. I had
That's
to ask
yeah.
you, we're going to get this far and not have this come up.
Yeah, right. No, there's a lot in there. So let me say this. When I think about moving forward, over the next year, there's a couple things I have to keep in mind because right now there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, as you said. And if you watch the stock market, the one thing the stock market is just incredibly allergic to is uncertainty, right? It hates uncertainty. It wants to know where we're headed. And right now, this is not bashing the Trump administration at all. It's just,
Mhm.
it is what it is. It's more of a chaos theory
Yeah.
kind of administration. He loves to make sure that he keeps competitors, other countries off balance. And the cadence and the speed at which it moves and sometimes can fluctuate throws us all curveballs.
Mhm.
But if you look at the objective and where it's headed, it does have a clear objective. It knows where it wants to get over a certain period of time. And he knows he's got to build a lot of economic momentum going into the midterms. So he's got a window now of 5 or 6 months where he's going to make all the change he can make, blow things up, if you want to use that figuratively,
Mhm.
to allow the economy then and to allow companies to start investing and to start building a growth momentum headed into the midterms. That being said, right now we're in that period of just incredible uncertainty where we don't know whether to cut left or right or, dish or dash or do whatever we need to do. We're hearing like from Mexico tariff perspective, for instance. So they've applied the 25%, but there are ongoing negotiations behind the scenes that sound like we're going to get that down in the 5 to 10% range. And then maybe it sticks there and it stays there. Canada will be the same thing, except Canada's going through, leadership changes. And I think the Trump administration has a little bit of a geopolitical bent to the Canadian tariffs. He wants to see regime change there, I think. And until there's a clear path for that, I don't know that we back off a lot on the Canadian tariffs. I think they're a bigger risk than maybe Mexico. China's a long-term battle, whether it's this administration or a Democratic administration, the next wave. I think we've seen history now where these tariffs are going to continue to be applied just because of the concerns over where China's headed and where the US is headed, and it's ultimately into this collision course somewhere down the road. So I think as companies try to balance out where we're headed in the future, there's a ton of uncertainty out there, and we're all dealing with it on an hour by hour, month by month basis. And I don't know that it smooths out over the next 4 or 5 months. But ultimately, remember, this administration's goal is a fast growing economy, lower inflation, And sticking high tariffs on these countries indefinitely doesn't fit that mold. The transition process to try and get manufacturing moved back to the US, and that transition process can take 3 or 4 years, and it doesn't have that amount of time. So it's going to do these things to try and generate some action, some activity to get some of that process started, but it's got to back off a little bit if it starts to see inflation start to surge. Ooh, that's going to be the enemy of any recovery process. It'll keep the Federal Reserve in check. It affects so many different things, and it will do the one thing that the Trump administration can't afford, and that's a stalled economy.
Okay.
Uh, and so I think that's the one thing we can fall back on is at least they understand that. Now, again, in this first two quarters of this term, it can get ugly. I mean, it's going to get volatile. I looked at Q1 GDP projections and they don't look good right now, and it's what you said, Chris. It's the fear, it's the uncertainty, it's purchasing managers not knowing exactly what they need to do. Do I inbound a lot right now and stockpile and have 3 years of merchandise in the warehouse, or do I go ahead and assume that they're going to slowly back off on these tariffs? And so I'm just bringing in the bare minimums right now and paying a higher tariff to ride this thing out. And I think you're going to see a lot of different strategies being employed out there. And I wish I had a nice, clean answer, but I just don't. I know the dollar's supposed to stay stronger, over time, and so if that helps a purchasing decision, we know that that's gonna be in place. But again, I think Mexico imports are gonna feel different than if I'm sourcing from China or if I'm sourcing from Europe or India, and so it is gonna be country by country, I believe.
Yeah. So it's going to come down to manufacturer and the direction that they're going to go based off of the production countries that they're working with, or like you said before, depending on their diversified portfolio of where products are being created and where they're being brought in from. As I heard, some people are biting the bullet, some and saying we're not going to do increases. We'll eat the 25%, increase over the next 6 months. But as you said, we're sort of in that break it before you build it phase. Before you build a new kitchen, you got to rip out the old kitchen and build it up. That's where, excuse me, a lot of uncertainty might be coming in because they're breaking things right now that were in place to make room for, as you said, the new outcome that they're looking to make, but they don't have a lot of time to do it. So that's why we're seeing these rapid fluctuation in tariffs and things that are happening in other places because they need to be in place and see some kind of bounce back within a month period, not years. That could be one reason we're seeing people eat it for 6 months because this might start leveling itself off, and they can adjust in 6 months. But why put yourself through the hassle where others are hedging their bets by saying, well, if we have 3 years of supply, we have 3 years of supply, and in 3 years we're still good to go. So I guess, as you said, there's no simple answer to anybody that says, well, if you do A, you're going to be fine. You're going to do B, you're going to be fine, because it's all going to be coming down to the independent companies and what their strategy may be for the next 6 months or a year or 2 years until this sort of finds its way home to where that endpoint may be.
Absolutely, and I bet that the people who are inbounding, like, 3 years of supply were probably sourcing in China, I'm guessing, only because those feel like the ones that are probably the stickiest tariffs, like, those are probably in for the long haul. And
Gotcha.
across multiple administrations. If I'm sourcing out of Mexico, I don't know, I'm probably hedging my bets a little bit that, it looks like, the Mexican president, like, she's playing well with the Trump administration, and she's doing things, and I feel like he gets a few concessions from the Mexican government, and then I think a lot of those tariffs will back right off. Canada, again, longer term, but we'll see. I mean, April 2nd is gonna be another big timeline when who knows what's coming, and that's unfortunately creating the uncertainty, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Now, with manufacturing, we talked before about the growth in America being so exponential compared to other countries at this point. And do you think that's in turn for some of these companies that are working outside the United States to say, hey, we had the issue with COVID. We had the issue with the first Trump term where we did have tariffs put in place. There caused a lot of uncertainty for us. It backed us up. Let's bring, as you said, with the China plus X, bring more of that manufacturing onshore, even if it's in a limited capability or capacity to produce maybe some of our top performing products here. And that way we know it's here and we're good to go. Do you think that's sort of why we're seeing that happening as well, to sort of plan for the long-term future in manufacturing, and not, and next time if there are tariffs in say 10 years and they go, well, we're going to do 100%, they go, haha, we're already here, it doesn't bother us at all, kind of thing?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So I talked to a purchasing manager, and that purchasing manager told me, he said, Keith, in the first trade war, that was kind of like strike one, but it was kind of a shame on you. I didn't see that coming, so other problems. COVID was like strike two. My supply chain broke down. I couldn't get products. That was still kind of like strike two on the rest of the world, right? No one saw COVID coming. Strike three coming out of COVID maybe was on the rest of the world. Maybe I couldn't see it coming. Maybe I couldn't quite prepare for it. But as we get into the next couple waves, if they're strike four and five, that person told me it's probably my head. I'm probably going to lose my job because I should have absolutely seen the next supply chain challenge coming and I should have been prepared for it. So I should have had my China plus X strategy being executed and I need to get ahead of it. I can't tell you who it was, but I met with the CEO, the major HVAC manufacturer, and he told me that his board of directors had come to him and said, I need you to be able to get 60% of the products that you need sourced out of the United States. And I need you to be able to do that by the end of 2020. At the time, this was 2023. They gave him a timeline of like the beginning of 26.
Oh,
And he said, okay, so if I produce a whole HVAC system, 60% of those products need to come out of the US and I can still inbound 40%. And they said, no, if you sell 100,000 units a year, we want you to be able to get 60,000 of those units 100% sourced in the US by 2026. You got 3 years to pull that off. And they were saying essentially, no, I don't want you to be out of product ever again and
yeah.
do whatever you have to do to make that happen. And that story is playing out hundreds of thousands of times across the US. I mean, we've got what 14 million businesses in the US, it is probably literally playing out that many times, 100,000, 200,000 times, across the economy. So, the other thing too that we haven't talked about is a lot of the manufacturing construction I talked about. We haven't felt the impact of those first products rolling off of those assembly lines yet.
Okay.
So that construction activity took place in 21, 22, 23, 24. Some of those facilities are just now getting to the point where they're ready to start producing material. So we really don't even know what that domestic production is going to do to some sourcing of products and raw materials like electrical equipment, right? And electrical supplies. You may start to see changing U.S. distribution patterns based on, a brand new, like in my backyard, we have a new Panasonic battery plant going in. And it started 3 or 4 years ago. We've been talking about it. We've been building houses and building roads and infrastructure to get ready for it. The construction's wonderful. We're hiring a lot of people, but we haven't seen those 5,000 employees start cranking batteries off that assembly line yet. That happens late this year, early next year. That changes US distribution in a big way, at least in this part of the country. And again, that story's playing out multiple times around the country. So not only is are tariffs an issue and the changing tariff environment an issue, but just I think sourcing in general is really gonna go through a process of change.
So, with the current administration's goal of bringing more manufacturing here on our shores and creating more jobs and more economic growth, it might not be something that we actually are seeing product from here. So, like, they might be saying, okay, we're imposing a 25% tariff. That's going to help push a company that goes, hey, between the last tariffs and COVID, and then, whatever happened after COVID, we're fed up with this. We're going to get hit with 25% more. We got to switch up our strategy and bring more into the States at this point. We might not see the initial product for them for 4 or 5 years, but we're going to see the construction starting to occur, which will then also help the economic growth because now we're talking about more construction jobs. You're selling more electrical product, you're selling more HVAC product during that whole construction time. So we might not be seeing the product growth as you were talking about for years, but we will see a boom in construction when it comes to manufacturing and housing and commercial that has to be built up for these new plants that may be happening in these different areas of the country.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, our average was somewhere between 60 and $80 billion in manufacturing construction each year in the decade prior to the pandemic. And
Mhm.
now we're clipping along at about a $237 billion rate. So it's almost exponential. It feels like it. And yeah, that's going to ripple effects all the way through the entire supply chain and how we source and how we hire. And and in economic terms, I run with a bunch of economists who are actually a boring crowd, believe it or not, right? Shock. you know and if you ask four of us our opinion, you're going to get five different answers, six if one of them went to Harvard, right? So yeah, we make meteorologists feel really good about themselves, by the way. The the impact here overall, from like a brand new manufacturing plant, we're not counting in labor or jobs anymore. So brand new steel plant can be run with 25 people, you
Yeah.
know, 24/7, 365. Some of the new manufacturing facilities are so robotic and so automated that you can run them with 12 people, 13 people. But what we're going to measure is we're cranking off thousands and thousands of widgets off of those assembly lines, and all the supply chain and activity and the material that goes into feeding those assembly lines. That's where the big impact will be. And so we're going to start measuring it economically in slightly different terms than, how many jobs did we create in manufacturing this year based on reshoring.